Good evening, and welcome to Rock Solid Radio. I'm Linda Hutchinson, the Executive Director of Rock Solid Families.
And I'm Merrill Hutchinson, President of Rock Solid Families. And we are excited to have you join us for the next 30 minutes as we talk about the good, bad, and ugly of relationships. A huge shout out to our sponsors, La Rosa's and Buffalo Wings and Rings in Greendale, Indiana, Greendale Cinemas, and Maxwell Construction. We are so thankful for these local businesses who have made this show possible. So whether you are listening live or online, Rock Solid Radio, helping to strengthen our community one family at a time on your hometown radio, Eagle Country 99.3. Hey, welcome to Rock Solid Radio, and this is Merrill Hutchinson, President of Rock Solid Families, and I would just like to say hi to everybody that's out there today, and again, Linda, it looks like they gave us another week to talk. So,
hey, Eagle Country, well, thanks for letting us come back.
Yeah. You know, last week we talked all about the essential elements of a healthy and a successful relationship. And it came down to that one word of serving, putting others' needs first. And so, we hope that after our show and through the week, you had time to go out and have conversation with your spouse or your partner and figure out, what does serving mean to us and in our home? Yeah. So hopefully that served you well as you learn and teach others to serve well. Yeah.
And, the phrase that we were talking about is how can I help? Going to your neighbor, going to your friend, going to your parents, how can I help? And your spouse, how powerful that is. But what our community would look like if we would just treat one another with that thought of how can I help you? How can I serve you? But we really want to talk this week a little bit about something different. We feel like there's a very different dynamic that needs to be in place between a parent and a child. We're going to be talking today a little bit about why we feel it's important that we teach children responsibility and resourcefulness, doing for themselves, not as a parent, not doing for them what they could do for themselves. And, before we start, hon, I really kind of want to talk a little bit about something I read recently. It's a book that I just was really drawn to. The title especially was called The Collapse of Parenting by Dr. Leonard Sachs.
That doesn't sound good.
It doesn't sound good. And I'm telling you, it does speak to what our culture is dealing with today. And so I kind of would really recommend it. It's a book you can actually get in the library. I got it free, and then I loved it so much I had to go out and buy my own copy. But he quotes in here, he's a child psychologist himself, but he quotes a Canadian psychologist who'd worked with teens and children for over 40 years. And he writes about this thing that just really riveted me, and it literally stopped me in my tracks when I was listening to it, about really where our young people are turning to for instruction, for authority, for modeling, for guidance, and the fact that it's not moms and dads anymore.
Yeah.
It's not teachers. It's not other adults. You want to take a guess, hon, where they're going?
Well, I mean, for sure, my first guess would be they're going on the internet. YouTube, their heroes and those kinds of things. Maybe a friend. Yeah. Maybe whatever's fun or cool. Or what their best buddies doing. So I know that's where a lot of that is coming from. Yeah. This is interesting stuff. And I think, today in our conversation, we really have an opportunity to, freeze frame a little bit about where we are with parenting, how we got there. And again, this isn't something that happens overnight. This is something that happens due to trends, the latest psychology. And not to say that all of that is bad, but we have to – sometimes, I use a statement that we throw the baby out with the bathwater. And if anything happened 20 years ago, it must be bad, so throw it all out. Yeah. And so we really want to take some time to look and see what has happened, the collapse of parenting. So what's caused this collapse or this collapsing, and where do we put the brakes on and start to shore up our home and create that foundation?
Think about what our children are consumed with, hon. I mean, think about when they throw a fit, when you ask them to put down their phone or their tablet at the dinner table, or God forbid, not allowed to bring it in the car. And this is really the first generation that's finding their primary attachment in peers, social media, the internet, instead of adults. And I if you could get a hold of the texts that go back and forth from your preteen or your teen to another peer about you as a parent, I think you would be appalled. They don't need you. They have each other. They feed on each other. And that, my friends, is a recipe for disaster. Honey, I don't know how many Eagle Country listeners out there are as old as you and I.
Oh, no, you had to go there, didn't you?
But when I was watching TV as a kid, I was watching Brady Bunch and Andy Griffith, where mom and dad were the boss. Little House on the Prairie, and you didn't dare challenge their authority. Mm-hmm. I can hardly stand to listen to shows these days.
Yeah, I mean, even when we, with our kids, if we're watching something that's supposed to be on the Disney or the Family Channel, and we listen to shows and we see harsh sarcasm, we see arguing with the parents, we see parents undecided, and you're just
uninvolved,
like, wow, just kind of that rudeness. And again, you keep that in perspective as you're watching it, and you go, it's just a show.
Right.
It's just joking.
We're just kidding.
Yeah, we're just kidding. But the idea here is the basic saturation of this that your kids are getting, that our kids are getting, and they think it's just commonplace. It's what happens in all the homes. Yeah. And in the meantime, something we're going to talk a little bit about today is, what happened to the adult, the parent, the leader in our home. And there's good reason why the leader has left. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to bring the leader back in.
Yeah. Sit down and one time and just watch alongside your children and think, okay, what kind of message are they speaking about? We have this argument a lot with our kids, the preteens and teens who want to play these mature video games where they're shooting and blood squirting, and they're like, Mom, it's just a game. But what kind of images, what kind of impressions are we leaving on our children in their minds? And that same thing goes with who's the authority in the home, who's the boss?
Yeah.
And we're going to be talking about today about reestablishing the parents as the primary authority and the primary influencer in your child. And if that means shutting down the internet or taking the phone away, God forbid.
Oh, my gosh. Wait, that's
so
World War III right there.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get rolling. So today the topic is who's the boss, right? Who's the boss? I'm the boss. Everybody wants to be the boss until you actually have to take the responsibility of it.
Yeah, and we're talking primarily in the home.
Yeah, in the home, okay? And so that's really what our direction is going to be about today. I want to just talk a little bit about an article that I read. This was some research that was done. I believe it was Australian, but, I read it and it made completely sense to what I see when I worked my years as a school counselor. And this article was about research on kids, the frequency of kids arguing with their parents, not their siblings, but with their parents.
Wow.
And from this research, it was calculated that the average was about 2,000 arguments per year.
No way.
Yeah. Well, now, again, they go on to state that these are not full-blown, attacks, but these are strong disagreements.
Sure.
The kids bickering.
Challenging the parent's
and
authority.
the parent challenges back. And so that kind of constitutes the argument. So that in our simple math, that works out to about 6 arguments a day.
Oh, no way.
Where moms and dads and kids are bickering back and forth with each other.
Can I just say, there was no way that I was going to do that with my parents. My dad was 6'4".
Argue with your dad?
My dad was 6'4", and he had a big hand. And
I still wouldn't argue with your dad.
Yeah, for sure.
The article then goes on and makes a statement that just kind of blows my mind, but it helps to bring into view what we want to talk about today. The article makes a statement and says, and this is a comment from a parent, it's hard to use logic when dealing with a screaming child.
No kidding.
Duh. All right? I don't want to be disrespectful, but duh. As I talked about in previous shows, emotions and logic do not run hand in hand. When the brain is emotionally charged, very, very difficult to run into a logical mind. And so a screaming toddler is just that. I call that a storm, a storm of emotion. So how did we get to this point that we would actually engage in arguing with our kids?
I hate seeing it when I'm out. Anybody out there in Eagle Country ever see one of those conversations in a restaurant or on the football field, and you're like, what are you doing, Mom, Dad? Stop.
Yeah. Well, let's go back just a little bit just so that we can frame this up for good conversation. Whether it was like in the 70s or the 80s, lots of psychology came across and talked about the idea of your kids having a say, that your kids have feelings, that they need to be having the rights of a child.
Don't say no.
Don't say no. Don't offend them. And so at that point, guys, this is just what's crazy. Think about how long parenting has been going on. Back in the 70s and the 80s, it was one of the first major times that we started to doubt ourselves as parents. I mean, this is a natural God-given role to be a parent. We didn't invent parenting. And all of a sudden, in the last 20 to 30 years, we've started doubting what we're doing, doubting what we stand for in our home, and actually allowing an 8-year-old to try to convince us what's right.
A child-centered home.
Yeah, the child-centered home. Now, I need you guys to stay with us here because we are at all and by no means talking down about our kids, not disrespecting our kids, okay? No. None of that. In
but
fact,
they're a child.
What we're trying to do is actually give you the ability to move further into the future more successfully with your child and for your child.
Yeah.
Okay? And so what we're talking about here is establishing first an authoritative home. All right? I didn't say authoritarian.
Yeah.
I said authoritative.
Yeah. Before you go into that, Hun, for those listening out there, we also have a blog, and you actually wrote quite a bit about this on a blog. And there's actually two of them, and one of them was, when did discipline become a dirty word?
Yeah.
And then the top 10 list for discipline. And again, we're talking about authority today, but discipline and authority go close hand in hand. So I'd really encourage anybody out there listening to go to Rock Solid Families, our website, rocksolidfamilies.org, and check out Merrill's blog on this about authoritative and authoritarian. Good stuff. Definitely, I think everybody would benefit from that.
Yeah. I mean, and that's a good point. A lot of what we talk about here on Rock Solid Radio is going to be in our blogs and different things like that. So we're trying to be consistent in our message, and I want you to have different opportunities to grab this information. Well, let's go back to the authoritative versus authoritarian parent, okay? And I think the authoritarian parent was the one that got us in trouble. It's the one that made us throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to parenting, because the authoritarian parent came across as some nasty, mean person who it was their way or the highway. The dictator. There was
screamer.
No reasoning. Yes, there was screaming. They're slamming a fist. And you know how I win my argument? I just yell louder.
Right.
That's how I win. Or I pound my fist harder. I intimidate, right? And so we still see adults using these techniques all the time in arguing. I mean, when they are in a disagreement with their spouse, the way I'm going to win that one, I'm just going to yell louder than you. And that's when we are drifting into that authoritarian, because it's actually authoritarian is a working out of fear. That I'm going to lose control. So if I can just put up that big facade of being something bigger, maybe I can intimidate you into submission. All right. And so what we really want to talk about is authoritative. And authoritative is that idea of we know who's in charge by the words, by the actions, by the confidence, by the security and the predictability, by the manners that are shown and the faith that is shown and the respect that is shown and the honesty.
An example.
The example, all right? That is where we get the authoritative parent. Let's back up a little bit too, Hun, though. For me to be authoritative, I've got to have a foundation to build my authority on. You remember our earlier show when we talked about rock-solid families?
The wise and the foolish builders.
Yes, and so this is where we started to question where we get our right to say what's right and wrong.
Yeah.
And listen, between Linda and I, neither of us have been 100% right in everything. You know, we make our mistakes and we mess up, but we go to the ultimate authority, and that is where our rock-solid family comes from.
Yeah. And God has called us to be the parents that he's called us to be, you know, to have authority to teach and to train up our child in the way he should go. And when he's older, he will not depart from it. I mean, that's biblical. So we are called, and that means having tough conversations, you know, and I don't know if anybody else out there is a teacher by trade, but as I was a young teacher, I will never forget having these nightmares as a young junior high teacher. And these nightmares had me screaming at the top of my lungs into my junior high classroom and my students, and no one was listening. And that was that fear. I would wake up with that cold sweat thinking, you know, I don't want to be that teacher or that parent that's barking orders and no one is listening, you know. So I don't know if anybody else relates to that, but that's been a nasty nightmare in my past.
A lot of teachers can relate to that dream, that nightmare. So let's talk a little bit about how we build that authoritative parenting structure in your home. I've got 10 tips for how to run through in your house. And some of these are no-brainer kind of does, and some of them are going to take a little bit of thought. But one of the first things we want to talk about is just what we said before, establishing the common foundation. Yeah. And we want to encourage both you and your spouse being on the same page in your home.
Yeah, a united front. Got to have a united front.
Yes, that united front. This is going to be one of the best gifts you can ever give your children. And so if you don't agree on something, go behind closed doors, go away from the kids, and come to common ground on how you're going to parent and what your expectation is going to be.
And you know, hon, we need to stop there for a second, because there's a lot of parents out there that don't have a spouse to lean on, that are parenting alone, whether it be through a single parent, whether it be a divorce situation, blended families. Maybe you're a step parent and you don't feel like you have any authority. And that's a really difficult situation to be in. And the kids are the ones that suffer. It brings on anxiety. It brings on depression. It brings on anger because they're confused. They don't know who to listen to.
Yeah.
So we really encourage you to get some help with that if you don't have that solid foundation and that united front.
Yeah, that shifting sand.
Yeah.
Okay. And so the first thing is getting a common ground of values and behaviors. The second thing is just Linda said before, uniting with your partner. All right. And as Linda just talked about, you know, if we're in a single parent home, it is worth the money that you would spend in getting mediation or counseling for you and the other parent of that child to come together on how we're going to raise this child. This is huge. Okay. I work with parents all the time just to do this. Listen, they might hate each other, but when it comes to working with that kid, we've got to try to get on the same page for that kid's sake. The next thing is if you're going to be the authoritative parent, we're talking about clearly laying out your expectations. You know, you assume often that your kids know what is expected, but frequently you have one expectation one day, and the next day you change it based on your mood. And so whether it's homework done at a certain time, certain chores need to be done, how they talk or behave in the house, lay those out and repeat those frequently, not in a yelling or preaching, but just carrying that out through the house. Lay that out.
Yeah. And, you know, we don't want to confuse you with what we talked about last week about being a servant, as I mentioned earlier. You could do for your children, but is it better that they learn to do for themselves? So if the expectation is that you pack your own lunch in the morning, is the expectation that you get out your own clothes, you know, those are things that you could do for them. But are you doing them a favor by doing that for them?
Absolutely not.
Yes. No.
You know, not good, especially if they're age appropriate.
Yeah.
So once we lay out the expectations, lay out the intended consequences. I mean, the natural consequences. This is not where we become authoritarian and we say, I'm going to do this or that and threaten. This is where we say, you know, if you forget your book bag and going to school, I won't bring it up. And so if you have to walk your recess or you get a bad grade on something, that is going to be what happens. And don't apologize for that.
Yeah. and I can't help but think about AR goals. Anybody else out there have kids with AR goals and the fight every 9 weeks?
Around our house.
Yeah, and it seems like it's like a surprise. Oh, we have this AR goal, and they wait till like the last couple days, and they're wanting to go to the library and read all night long to get their AR goal. And so you got to lay out, if your expectation is that they get their AR goal and they don't, then they need to know beginning of those 9 weeks, what's the consequences? No tablet, no phone, whatever. So they know. It's not a surprise.
Yeah, so once we lay out expectations and we lay out consequences, the next thing is we really have to be aware of our consistency and how our consistency changes with our mood. Okay?
Yeah.
So we change our expectations. We have this wavering based on how tired we might feel. Our kids are not allowed to be on the tablet from this time to this time. And that particular day, the kids are driving you crazy, and you say, go ahead, get on your tablet. I've just had enough. And so right there at that instant, you may not think that's a big deal in that time, but now you opened up the window for your child to start to second guess the expectation. Guarantee you, what are they going to do tomorrow?
Sure, they're going to ask again.
Yeah, I'm going to try it again. Sure. And now you're wondering, why am I arguing with my kid every day about why they're not getting their tablet?
Well, because it worked. It worked yesterday when you were tired, so if they nag you long enough, then you'll give in. It's kind of like the candy in the aisles,
Sure.
Please, 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 please. Well, if they know the fifth please you say yes, then they'll at least do 5 every time you're there.
Yeah. Yeah. So that leads to our next thing. This is the whole idea of you being predictable and consistent creates a security in your child.
Yep.
One of the things that I see with kids that have inconsistency in parenting is I see an insecurity. And that insecurity then creates a kid that first operates out of fear, but then they become hardened. And they become tough to try to get the things that they want for themselves. And so be predictable, be consistent, and your kid will know, okay, this is what I can count on.
And be calm. Emotion, I get that way. They push my buttons. They know when I'm tired. And so the emotion, you got to take it out of it. And if you can't remove yourself from the emotion, then remove yourself from the situation. Take a time out.
Absolutely. Remove yourself. Let everybody settle down.
Yeah.
The next thing is that whole idea of, we were in the 80s and 90s moved to this whole idea, explain to your kids everything. They need a full explanation. It needs to be understood. Good luck with getting a 4-year-old to understand exactly why they're being disciplined, okay? So especially when they are emotionally charged. As I said before, you have a hard time mixing the emotional mind with the logical mind. So say what you need to say, do what you need to do. Don't get into over explanation. Let it calm. And then you know what? A half hour later, an hour later, then you can have time to talk and explain. Sometimes
the silence is deadly for those little guys. They're like, they're waiting for the hammer to come down. And never negotiate with a child, don't. Especially in the teenage years, they will try to negotiate you to death. Know ahead of time what your expectations are, what the consequences are, be a united front, and never, ever, ever argue with your child.
I want to go back to that negotiation thing, okay? Because this is just so big. That whole idea of negotiating with a child, I've actually had parents come in and say, that's a good skill to learn as an adult. Here's what we're looking at, guys. Negotiating with a child makes the assumption that you're negotiating with somebody that has and honors your value system. Children do not have your value system yet. Okay? And so we're not going to entertain a negotiation with somebody who does not have our value system. This may start to change as they get into their teens and even young adulthood when we go, you know what, we can trust what that child is valuing. And at that point, you can run through some negotiation. But early on, an 8-year-old, we're not negotiating.
Right.
How about if I just have a 5-minute timeout instead of a 10-minute timeout? How about not?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay?
As a matter of fact, in our house, if you're trying to negotiate, the punishment gets worse. So you're better off not messing with it.
Well.
And again, great point, Merrill. We have 2 adult children as well. And so that's a whole different conversation. They're becoming now your friend, and you're a mentor sure you're not their parent in authority as much. You've kind of given them wings to fly. So, there's so much good that we could be talking about with this, hon. You have hit on so much. There's a lot of great resources out there. Before we, kind of wind up, I just want to mention a couple that, I mentioned The Collapse of Parenting, How We Hurt Our Kids When We Treat Them Like Grown-Ups by Dr. Leonard Sachs. That's a great resource. I would really recommend it. Like I said, I found it on audio at the library, and it was so good. He talks about the culture of disrespect going on now and why so many kids are on medication, why kids are so fragile. So if you have a problem with bullying in your home and their kids are coming home crying, he just backs up with tons of research, and he gives some practical tools and solutions. So how to regain that authority. And then another book that we've used for years, hon, we're John Roseman fans, is The Parenting by the Book, which is a great biblical parenting tool that we've used before. So.
Yeah, and he was good because he was one of the first guys that said, wait, we don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Some of what we used to do 100 years ago actually kind of made sense. Yep. All right. Well, hey, we are getting ready to wrap things up. So let's run through a quick little reminder list of some things that we need to just keep in mind so that you and your spouse can get things back in line for the sake of your kids and for your home. All right, a couple of reminders. First off, if you have to tell your kids that you're the boss,
you're probably
not. Yeah. Okay,
I'm the boss of you.
Yeah, so let's not use so many words. Let's use actions.
And confidence.
I mean what I say. Mm-hmm. I say what I mean. As you're going to hear me say very frequently, use words less. Mm-hmm. We talk ourselves into believing what we're actually saying when we actually just need to do. Okay? Mm-hmm. So the second thing is your actions are going to speak louder than your words. Be consistent. Mm-hmm. Do what you say you're going to do, and try to do it consistently. If you're going to, stand for something, you just do your kids such a gift by them knowing what's coming next.
Yeah, and that nightmare I had as a teacher about screaming to the top of my lungs, I found that if I turned the lights off and I spoke in the most silent, quiet voice with so little emotion, my teenagers were riveted like, what in the world's going on? So that actually...
We're in trouble.
Exactly. They took on more emphasis.
All right. The next thing is mom and dad, get on common ground. Establish strong leadership among the two of you, that program that you're looking for. Support each other, back each other up. If there is a disagreement on something, work to resolve away from the kids so that when you come together with the kids, you are a united front, okay? Yeah. And I can't emphasize enough, if we're in a situation of separation or divorce, we have to work. We're going to work overtime on this one because this is for your kids' sake, all right? Here's what is so important. The ultimate compliment that you're going to get, guys, is when your kid is raising their kids. Mm-hmm. They're going to start to practice what we're talking about today. Mm-hmm. They're going to practice what you showed them. And the ultimate compliment is going to be, it worked for mom and dad. Yeah. I want to continue this. Yeah. All right. And so that's what you hang your hat on each day as you parent. You can't expect the immediate return. It's going to take some time, but we're going to thank you as our society, and your kids will thank you. Yeah. They might be 25 before they appreciate and respect and understand what you were doing. But, thanks, Merrill, so much. That has been such an important point, and this is such an important program. We need our parents to be engaged in leading their home well. Stronger families, we believe, build a stronger community and ultimately a nation. We need that so desperately. So Eagle Country listeners, next week, you do not want to miss our show. We will be talking about the power of one. What in the world? Yeah, the influence of others that have had in your life. So be thinking about, who is it? Was it a teacher, a coach, a friend of parent of a friend? Somebody that had an influence over you. We're going to be talking about that next week. We're going to be shouting out to some people. We would love to hear
hear from you about who those people were, those positive influences in your life, and how that makes a difference in our home, in our community, in our nation. And so tune in next Sunday evening at 7:30. We'll be back, hopefully, for another edition of Rock Solid Radio, building a stronger community, one family at a time.
All right, let's get out there and make it a great week.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Rock Solid Radio. For help or more information about what you've heard this evening, contact us at rocksolidfamilies.org or call us at 812-576-ROCK. That's 812-576-ROCK. Again, a huge thanks to our sponsors, La Rosa's and Buffalo Wings and Rings in Greendale, Indiana, Greendale Cinema, and Maxwell Construction. If you have questions you'd like answered on air or want to chime in on something you heard this evening, go to our Facebook page, Rock Solid Families. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to tune in next Sunday evening at 7:30 for another episode of Rock Solid Radio. I'm Linda Hutchinson, and for my husband Merrill and I, thanks for tuning in on your hometown radio, Eagle Country 99.3.